I'm Haley.
And I'm Rayanne.
So today we'll be talking about student debt and the effect that it has on academic and physical performance. So we will talk about the scope and focus, the relevance, the research question, the literature review, the first and second hypothesis, the survey idea, the variables, and the sample plan. So our research focuses on the academic and physical well-being impacts of student debt. So student debt is student loans are supposed to relieve financial stress and to provide access to education. But a lot of studies show that actually it can undermine those things, and it can cause stress, and it can lead to lower GPAs and a decline in physical performance. So we are going to focus on the academic consequences of uniformed borrowing. So that's when people aren't fully aware of the consequences of borrowing early on and then having to pay them off later, and that can cause stress-related issues. We are going to focus on undergraduate college students because this is often when people are taking on their large first loans, and then we're going to exclude long-term graduates because they have different spending habits. I'm going to pass it to Renee.
So then that brings us to relevance, and basically what I'll be talking about is who is impacted by our research and why. So first and foremost, I believe that this issue really directly affects all of us as students, whether you're here at Northern University or at any other four-year university. It affects us because as rising tuition costs are becoming a problem, it, as a result, leads us as students to take out maybe more debt than we can handle, and as a result that cause higher levels of stress and can impact one's GPA and health. Then it is relevant for institutions, primarily those universities. If their students are struggling with debt repayment and stuff like that, their retention and success rates may lower. And then I think it finally comes down to our policymakers. I'm hoping that through our research, policymakers will see our results and will find a need for some more financial aid reform, whether that be grants, loan counseling, or just more financial education.
Alright, so our research question overall is how does student debt affect academic and physical performance? And the reason we chose this of all other options we had was primarily because this was the best option to actually measure. So we can measure academic performance, we can measure students' feelings on physical performance, whereas if we were going to look into a research question such as how does student debt or how does financial well-being affect your feelings about the job market, or how does the job market affect your stress? The issue with those is that's something you look onto postgraduate more so. So we felt that this would have a more comprehensive scope within the university. So the literature review. For our literature review, we looked at 3 separate sources. So our first source found that high debt, which was measured as an excess of debt of $30,000, resulted in financial stress for students. However, this study specifically showed that there was a link with this high debt and financial stress alongside also having other dependents such as siblings in university at the same time. Our second source found that reduced borrowing didn't always mean a better outcome. So they went to a community college in Lower Michigan, and they did financial well-being classes with a lot of these community college students, which initially you would think would be amazing. You think a lot of these students would reduce the borrowing, which they did by 7%. However, the result did not show that they ended up being less financially stressed. Actually, they were more financially stressed because they were more scared to take out loans. They were more concerned about their income to debt ratio, and they were more concerned with other issues as community college students. They were in 2-year academic settings, so they might have a family to take care of. They might have a full-time job outside of school. So their priorities are a little bit different from a 4-year university student. And finally, for our last source, we looked at debt and how it relates to health. And what this study found is something we want to expand on as well. They found that many students or many people who had large amounts of student debt as well would frequently go and skip medication in order to put off paying for refills or put off receiving medical care in order to cover other financial costs. Hand it back over.
Okay, so we're going to talk about both of the hypotheses that we came up with. So like we said, undergraduate students at public universities often experience significant financial stress, and this is due to the student loans that they have to take out. This burden is especially true for that heavy debt ratio, and like we said, that is $30,000 or more in student loan debt. This threshold we found is commonly accepted as high debt throughout like scholarly research on this topic. And this research suggests that financial pressure can negatively impact multiple aspects of a student's life. In particular, that is their academic success, so that is how well they're doing in the classroom, that is the information that they're retaining for their major. For this study, we want to focus on the relationship between student debt and academic performance, and this will be measured through self-reported GPA. In one of the studies that we used, we found that there was a statistically significant negative correlation between high levels of student debt and GPA. The correlation coefficient was negative 0.14. Well, this correlation is moderate and it indicates that student loan debt increases, academic performance tends to decrease. One possible explanation that we found for this is that students with greater financial burdens are often required to like work more hours to cover their tuition or their houses, their basic food and living expenses. And just like taking on extra shifts at work reduces the time that that student can spend at the library studying. It reduces the time that they can go to office hours to get a tutor, those things. And ultimately that will hinder their academic performance in the classroom. Additionally, there are some psychological stresses as well with debt. This can impair their concentration, it can reduce anxiety, and overall it can reduce their motivations. And all of these factors are very important when it comes to student success in the classroom. For our second hypothesis, we have that high levels of student debt are associated with delayed or avoided medical treatment. The impact of student debt extends far beyond academics. It also has significant implications on physical and mental well-being of a student. This study that we looked at explores whether students with high levels of debt are more likely to forego or delay medical treatments and medical care. This can include delaying visits to the doctor and stopping or reducing prescribed medications to the student. According to this study that we looked at, both students that are still enrolled in university and recent graduates of universities who report feeling financially burdened are more likely to delay these healthcare services that are necessary for their mental and physical health, and that this is just simply due to the cost of these treatments. These cost-saving strategies may look like they are saving money, but we know that in the long run, this can really have negative impacts on their health. These behaviors can include skipping routine checkups or mental health appointments, not filling prescriptions, and reducing dosage and frequency of medications. As student debt increases, the likelihood of these behaviors also rises, highlighting a troubling connection between financial burdens and reducing access to necessary medical care. This hypothesis emphasizes the effects of student debt. They are not only academic, but they are also deeply personal, and they do have really sad implications on someone's both physical and mental well-being. And next we will look at the survey ideas. As for our survey ideas, just like all of you guys in here, we are using Qualtrics as our online platform for the survey. Our main objectives here are to measure the key relationships between our variables. So for example, our first objective is to measure GPA versus debt. And this allows us to test our first hypothesis that Maddie was telling us about. Our second objective is to track delayed healthcare use. Once again, like she was saying, like she just touched on, we want to know if students are delaying any sort of healthcare. And then as for our third objective, we want to measure stress levels. This is mainly important because we believe this is the kind of key mechanism that limits or that links debt to lower GPA and delayed healthcare use. For our format, we chose a mix of kind of like a mix of different question formats. Those being multiple choice, the Likert scale, open-ended questions, and then as for participation, we really wanted to emphasize it being anonymous and voluntary, as we feel that will give us hopefully the best results.
Okay, next we'll talk about the variables quick. So we have both dependent and independent variables. So the first dependent variable that we will be looking at throughout this research is academic performance, and this will be measured through a self-reported GPA scale, which is a widely accepted indicator of a student's success in the classroom. The question on the survey will look like, what is your cumulative GPA? And then the student can respond below a 2.0 to 2.49, a 2.50 to 2.99, etc., until we get to the 4.0 threshold. Using a GPA range allows us to easily group and categorize and analyze the data while still capturing the academic trend across performance levels. We choose GPA as a primary measure because of the research, the studies that we looked at. They said that there is a negative correlation between student loan debt and GPA. Like you said, that negative correlation coefficient is negative 0.14, and this suggests that student debt increases, academic performance also tends to decrease. Financial pressure can contribute to this in many ways. For example, students who need to work longer hours, need to do that to afford school, leaving less time for them to study, attend class, and complete assignments, and this ultimately impacts their GPA. The second dependent variable that we have is physical well-being, and this applies to the healthcare habits that I talked about previously. We're going to be measuring just their behaviors with healthcare. So rather than asking students directly about how they feel about their health, we want it to be more like subjective. We want to focus on like their financially driven health decisions, and these decisions will serve as like behavioral indicators as to how their physical and mental health is. So we want to ask questions similar to, in the past year, have you delayed or canceled a medical appointment due to a financial concern? Have you stopped or reduced a prescribed medication because of financial strain? We want participants to be able to answer with yes, no, or NA not applicable. We think that like having a yes or a no will give us very clear data. If a student answers yes, it will indicate to us that there may be financial pressure that is preventing them from receiving their essential health care. This is especially concerning because delaying or skipping medication can lead to serious long-term health effects like we stated before. Lastly, we will talk about both of the independent variables. We have the level of student debt, we have the level of student debt, and we have healthcare seeking behaviors. So first, level of student debt. Our first independent variable is the amount of student debt that a participant currently holds. For this information to collect, we want to ask how much student debt do you currently have. Again, we want this to be a scale, so first it'll be 0, then it will be up to $10,000. We'll go all the way up to $40,000. Like we stated before, we believe that the $30,000 range is considered to be high debt, and that's just because of the scholarly studies that we use claim that to be high debt. And this will give us a very clear level of the student debt. And it's something that we will be paying very close attention to throughout our analysis. We want to ask students like their current class standing as well, so if they're a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, and how many years they've been enrolled in college. This context is very important to us because there is a proportion between how much debt someone has and how long they've been in school. So it is important that we clarify in the survey that the questions are specifically to educational debt and they aren't like credit card debt or other debt. We only want the debt that they're reporting to be debt that they have taken on from school to help pay for classes or to help pay for other educational things. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the healthcare seeking behaviors. The second independent variable ties directly into our second hypothesis that students with higher debt are more likely to forego medical treatment. We want to ask, have you ever avoided a medical visit or delayed filling a prescription? The questions again will be yes, no, not applicable. Very simple, very easy to collect the data. This will help serve as our independent variable because we want to predict or explain these physical and mental health outcomes, and this behavior is more than just a reaction to financial hardship. It's often a result of
debt induce stress, anxiety, and decision making under pressure.
Keep going.
Okay. No. Alright, so for our sample plan, our target group is college students enrolled in four-year universities. We will not be targeting two-year institutions particularly because they have a different focus, goals, and sets of people within them. Primarily just because if you're going to a two-year institution, you might be going primarily to get a certification for a job you currently have. You might not be looking to receive a full four-year bachelor's degree or go into a graduate program. So we don't feel that that would be applicable to us. We would like a sample size of a minimum of 200 students for significance. However, we would prefer to have more than this. So we will be using a couple different methods in order to attain this amount of people. We will use systematic sampling. What we will do is we will collect emails from multiple sources at Northern Michigan University. We will then send emails out to students, but first we will put them into an Excel file, randomize them, and select one out of every 5 to assure for randomization and also to reduce biases. So following this, we will also contact other college students that we know of back home or other college students who may be interested in participating both at Northern, like I said, back at home. So we may have students from WVU, from Pitt, from other institutions around the country that we are good friends with. We believe that this will help diversify the data as sticking to one particular area may not be relevant to multiple other areas throughout our country. Comments, questions, and concerns?